Well, hello, everyone. I'm Nancy Lowe, professor in the College of Education, and I am here this afternoon to introduce our first panel of the day. This particular panel is comprised of various constituents from backgrounds including business, nonprofit, politics, and education. We asked the panelists here today because of their work both in education and their specialty areas to provide us a well-rounded discussion on the current and evolving education initiatives that you've been hearing about. So joining us today, we have Mr. Brent Husson, President of Nevada Succeeds. Dr. Steve Canavero, Interim Nevada State Superintendent. Mr. Glenn Christenson, Managing Director of Velstand Investments. Ms. Terri Janison, Vice President of Community Development, United Way of Southern Nevada. And Mr. Colin Seale, Founder and CEO of thinkLaw. Our panel will be moderated by Mr. Todd Mason, Director of Government Affairs at WYNN Resorts. Thank you all. Thank you all for agreeing to serve on our panel today.
Thank you, Dr. Lowe. I hope, can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Just to the panel members, that's okay? Okay. Just to the panel members, remember we do have to switch these on before we begin talking. So just one state of logistics. And thank you all for being here. Privilege for me to be up here. I'm about a year in this great state this week. And it's a pleasure to be with so many people who have been working so diligently on these issues for much longer than I have been here. But it's an exciting time, as some of our other speakers mentioned. I want to start off, and I will do my very best just to ask at least an initial question of all of you, but please do feel free. I think the audience would certainly appreciate it. Feel free to jump in as you see fit. Brent, since you and I are the personal privilege here, you and I, if I'm not mistaken, are the only ones on this stage who are Sun Devils, alumni, with all apologies to all the wonderful universities, both where we are and represented in this room. I thought I would start off, because your organization has been so involved, obviously this past legislative session, but in so many different education issues, to ask you a general question. Where do you see the largest challenges for districts, for public education in general, as they begin to implement the reforms that the governor spoke about earlier?
Excuse me. Thanks, Todd. You know, we've actually been talking about this particular issue for a while now. Matter of fact, I began talking about it when the session was just getting underway, and I got called by a couple of people in this room that I won't name, and was asked not to talk about it until they got the session done, so that we could actually get a lot of the good reforms that needed to be done during the session done before I started criticizing what we weren't doing. And I accepted that, and it was true. We needed to work on the work we were doing. But my personal feeling and the feeling of our organization is that a lot of the reforms that were passed in the 2015 legislative session are wholly dependent on the quality of teachers and leaders in the classroom and in the building. And without having top-notch human capital in the district, implementation of, and you name it, Zoom schools, victory schools, pre-K, all-day K, if there's not a top-notch teacher at the front of that classroom, the implementation is not going to be as effective as we would hope. So the critical thing that we believe needs to be next, and when we've begun a project entitled What's Next Nevada, is that as a community, as a state, we need to begin focusing on how do we get enough teachers to Nevada? As all of you know, we've got over 1,000 classrooms right now that don't have licensed teachers in the front. They're either staffed by long-term subs or short-term subs even. But beyond just the number, how do we increase the quality across the board? And so those are the questions I think that as a community we need to think about very, very hard, and we need to act to fix them in a relatively short order. Otherwise, much of the reforms that were passed and the dollars that were put with those reforms, we will have no idea whether the policies were any good or not, because we won't be able to measure any outcomes because there won't be anybody actually there to implement. So that's what we're thinking about right now.
And can I just jump on that same statement? Again, I'm Colin Seale, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about in terms of teacher quality is we do a lot of talking about this idea of recruiting like excellent teachers. One of the things that I've learned though from being a teacher and also being in other professions is that, you know, not every attorney in the world is excellent, not every doctor is excellent, not every janitor or anybody in any profession is excellent. But what we really need to do is get some people that actually have the potential to be excellent. And I think once we start talking about it in that way, then we're thinking about teaching as a profession that we go into where we're given the capacity to get better. We're giving the tools to meet the needs of our students as we need to serve them. And I believe that we need to just be a little bit broader of what we talk about when we say we want excellent teachers. We want people that are going to be able to come in the classroom and to get the job done. And I think a lot about Henry Ford, and I think about a time where every car on a road was designed by a specialist, right? You had to be a specialist to be able to design a car. And we would never have as many cars on the road if that's what we ended up sticking with. But what he decided to do is like, okay, you focus on the tires and you focus on the engine, and we kind of broke it down in an assembly line way of doing things. And I think about teachers, and teachers are life coaches, curriculum specialists, psychologists, public speakers, all sorts of problem solvers all rolled into one. It's a very hard job. But if we as administrators, as people that are supporting the system, as community members can help to give the capacity, to give them the tools to make it a lot easier, then we could actually meet the need, which is kind of like putting a lot more cars on the road. We need to put a lot more excellent teachers out there and a lot more educated students out there to make the impact that we need for this 21st century.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Very good point. And I thought, forgive me for jumping around here, but I thought, Dr. Canavero, one of the things that I wanted to ask you in particular, and this ties to your point, is that I recall during the State of the State, the governor said that in funding these education reforms, he knew that he was asking a lot of the business community. What is it we're asking of our schools? And that includes certainly teachers, administrators. What are we asking of our schools as they begin to implement these reforms?
It's a good question. I'm assuming this is on. Okay, that's a good question. We're asking actually a tremendous amount and a tremendous lift for every system. So schools, districts, and the state as we move and implement the various reforms. Whether it's 52 Zoom schools now that are expanded in this next biennium, 36 victory schools that were initiated, the 16 awards for gifted and or the GTL program. There's a tremendous push on the implementation side. So the work that we're engaged in is shifting a bit of the evaluation system and the structures. One that takes into consideration the processes. The State Department is very good, and districts are very good at processes. We've been teaching that for years. Do this, expend the money in this way, and you will be okay. We're taking that and we're moving it towards an outcome-based model where we are asking for these programs to be implemented in such a way that's consistent with the law, that exercises all those financial stewardship responsibilities of any state agency when handling taxpayer dollars. But at the same time, we're saying, well, what is this going to result in? What are the outcomes for children at the end of these programs, whether those children are in a victory school, a Zoom school, or subject to a teacher who's been trained through the GTL program or the ARL program under Teach Nevada, which we've exercised. I think beyond that, though, I think the governor and legislature were wise in creating an external third-party evaluation. So I could stand up here in a year from now and say, hey, we're excellent, check it out. But at the same time, I think there's a need for an external party, and I think this is right for the state to understand, well, how were these dollars spent, and then what was the return on those investments in many of these programs. So there's 7 programs in total that will be evaluated from a third party that we've put out into the street. We'll have a national, I'm assuming, competition for this, and make the award, and then those evaluations will come. I'll just make one more point. I think the other way that we're asking a lot of schools and a lot of the system is also demonstrated recently, and I think this is kind of what does it look like, an example of what it looks like. The recent work of the state board in approving the Teach Nevada scholarship program. So here's a scholarship program that was generated and provides the state board with some discretion in terms of priority allocations. We know from parents, from teachers, from the community, from Clark County, from Washoe, that there's a shortage, and we hear it. So one of those needs, I think, that we're asking of the system to be responsive to taxpayers is to use that information to make really thoughtful and strategic choices in how we direct these investments. So the Teach Nevada Scholarship was recently awarded to 6 entities within our state who can provide the most teachers the fastest through their ARO program. So I think that's a way that we're demonstrating accountability and understanding a need and then making wise use of the investments. And then we will ultimately choose, and then we'll ultimately be evaluated based upon the outcomes of those investments for children. At the end of the day, there are the reforms. So if, our theory of action, if we invest here and we do these things, if it doesn't result in outcomes for kids, whether they be poor or whether they be English language learners or both, then we have a fallback mechanism on turnaround, which is a piece of legislation that was passed, as well as the Achievement School District. So there is that proverbial line in the sand.
Todd, I might take just a little bit different view of this from a business perspective. And you asked what are some of the challenges. I also think there's some real opportunities. In my mind, there are 2 pieces to the education delivery system. It's what goes on in the classroom, and there's a lot of business people that think they know how to run a classroom. They were in one once, but that's an area that we don't have much expertise at. But keep in mind that here in Clark County, the Clark County School District is the 2nd largest organization in the state after the MGM. So the challenge is that there aren't enough business policies, practices, and procedures that are being put in place. What's exciting to me is over the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of business people like Brent, like Terri, Hugh Anderson at the Las Vegas Metro Chamber, where we're trying to come in and help the district look at things in a different way. I was very fortunate to serve as a guest lecturer for Eva White. She teaches a master's degree class here at UNLV for up-and-coming leaders in education. And I talked with them about how businesses can be working together with educators. And I went through this whole thing and I explained policies and practices and procedures. And at the end of my discussion, one of the teachers in the back of the room raised her hand and she says, I understand that, but you business guys, you're so mean, And I said, well, let's talk about that for a second. I said, what do we talk about in terms of policies and practices? We said, goal setting, Don't you think that, in your classroom you set goals each year? We want to just do the same thing for the district. When I talk about things like paper performance, you're a great teacher, right? Or you wouldn't be here. Don't you think that you deserve something more than a teacher down the hall that may not be doing as well? How you define success? What are metrics for what you're doing in the classroom? These are all things that, as we've been working with the district, we have found that they've embraced them with open arms. It took a little while, but I think they've come to the conclusion that there are folks out there that really want to help them. And I would suggest that's a challenge. My biggest concern is that things aren't happening fast enough. We have to do more. It's a little difficult. In business, we refer to it as academic time when we're dealing with educators. But I think there's real opportunity here.
So I think it's my turn to speak. I'm going to kind of do maybe the third leg of that stool, if you will, from the education and the business standpoint, from the social service standpoint. I am a business person, have been working in education for about 15 years here in Clark County on a volunteer basis. But what I've found more than anything is that there's so much more that happens before that child ever walks into a classroom. So if we as a community are not identifying the fact that we've got over 50% of our children on free and reduced lunch, and our teachers have them for 6 hours and 11 minutes a day for 180 days, it's what happens with those children when they walk into that classroom. The monologue at lunch, I think, was a great example of the issues that our students are dealing with every single day. But that doesn't happen in a school system. That happens in the homes and in a community. And then the teachers have to deal with that when they come in. So you were talking about being social service workers and therapists, but the teachers are there supposed to be doing math and English and science, right? So if we as a community don't address, and I know we are, so there's a lot of social service agencies here that are also working, but we've really got to build, as Jaime says, that collaboration and make that collaboration actual and factual, because until we address what happens to those children every night when they go home and what happens on the weekend, I don't know how successful any system can be on educating them when there's such poverty and issues with mental health and all the other issues that they have to deal with every single day.
And thank you for making that point. I think that's very, very important. Kind of leads to my next question. And I would pose this initially to you, Mr. Christenson, but anybody really feel free to jump in. As Terri and I were talking earlier, you have this, at least I referred to it as a chicken and the egg sort of scenario, where we know we have to improve our local economy to provide more opportunities. But we know that the opportunities that don't exist do impact education today. So my questions, to be more specific, is what are those outcomes we are looking for as it relates to economic opportunity when we improve educational outcomes? What would you say?
I've spent a lot of time with the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance. And our mission really is economic and in many ways community development. Because our position is that if we can do a better job of having a more robust, sustainable economy, then we can do a much better job as a community on things like education, healthcare, unemployment, infrastructure, social services. So as we look at what we're doing as far as attracting, expanding, retaining, and diversifying businesses here, it occurred to us that we should be looking at why people aren't coming here. And what we found is that 35% of the companies that aren't coming to Las Vegas aren't coming because of our educational system, or we don't have the workforce that's needed to meet their business needs. And so the education really, we talk about it being inextricably linked to economic development, and I don't know that there's any better predictor of how we could do better as if we didn't have a better education system. So it's all linked together. The thing that Terry's talking about is absolutely true, but what we're really doing is building a community. I think you have to start with the business development, because if we don't have good paying jobs, we're not going to be able to do a number of these things, but you also then have to have an educated workforce.
And so I'm going through an interesting process right now where I'm potty training my daughter. So I'm learning a lot about patience, right? I have high expectations for what's going to happen, but I have to be very patient about the way I go about doing it. And when I think about what's happening right now, I tell you, I get a little bit concerned when I hear some talk about, well, you know, I know there's a sense of urgency, like we need to make these things happen right away, but let's actually, I'm going to walk in the shoes of a charter school that I've done some work for here, who they serve a Title I population, and they applied for Read by 3 funds, and were actually successful in getting these funds, right? And, you know, I think the application deadline was sometime in October. So that means they're probably going to get somebody maybe late November, early December, right? And then probably that person is not going to get into their groove until January. Granted, who are you actually getting in January or December? that's still in education? Probably not the best person, and if it is, that means we just played musical chairs with another school or another place that needed that person, right? So when I think about what that result is going to look like for this school at the end of this year, when we have a standardized test that we don't really have a baseline for because our test scores didn't come out properly last year, then we have to really exercise some patience to understand that we have taken the time to build a foundation that has never really been seen before in our state. So what I don't want to see in any way, shape, or form is an immediate retreat if we don't see the results that we're looking for at the end of this session, because it goes so quickly, right? But if we actually start to just look and see, well, what are the micro changes that we're seeing that are really positive? You know, what are some other metrics, in addition to some of the test scores, that show us that things are headed in the right direction? Things like student attendance, things like, just responsibility in general that's happening, especially because, as part of the trade-off between getting more resources, we've asked our folks to be more accountable. Accountability means more paperwork. Accountability means more meetings. It means less time for administrators to actually be doing their number one job, which is making sure the achievement of their kids is up to par and their teachers' development is up to par. So with all that being said, I really urge patience with that sense of urgency, but still understanding that we are not going to fundamentally change the entire landscape of education in a year and a half.
So Colin, I completely agree with you, right? But at the same time, I said I've been here for 22 years, about 15 working in this. We've got to stop talking about it. And so that's why I really appreciate what UNLV has done to bring everybody here together today. Because if we don't leave here today with some kind of a patient, urgent action plan, right? Because I think all of us are tired of talking about it. I was talking to Senator Woodhouse about the things. As we have these conversations, we all know what the little buckets of us are doing in our work. So Nevada Succeeds is doing this. I'm working with Brent, and Glenn and I are working together. We're all working together. But what is that patient urgent action step to really get it done? Because we haven't done it. And we identified a couple of serious policy issues that are affecting especially the teacher licensure. And so if we as a community can come together and identify them and stop really working by ourselves, but really identify what those are and then bring them to the next level, because then it's going to be up to the legislature and the electeds to make sure that it is implemented and effective. But if we don't really take today and make sure that that action plan is put into place, we're going to be here again next year doing the same thing, having the same conversation, and we're going to lose a whole another year of children that are in our system.
And thank you for making that point as well. I think it's absolutely correct. So I wanted to make sure at least that we haven't talked about this a lot today, but Colin and Brent and even Dr. Canavero, I know you have pretty extensive experience with charter schools. You mentioned charter schools. And when we talk about improving public education, it's important to remember that they are part of that discussion. And I know we have a number of charter schools. I come from Arizona where we had even more, and they were very much a part of the public education spectrum, if you will. Are there unique challenges or unique opportunities within charter schools? And I'd open that up to any of you.
So I sit on the board for the Charter School Association of Nevada, and I would say that anything in education, there are no silver bullets, just point blank period. There's not. And in Nevada, our charter schools have some strengths and they have some challenges. We certainly can use more charter schools that are serving Title I populations and really kids that are tough to reach. We don't have transportation, by and large, for a lot of our charter schools too, which makes it somewhat of a false choice. I'm from Brooklyn, so technically any place in New York City is accessible to me, but it's very different here when we have some really awesome school options that are not accessible because they're not in people's community and neighborhoods. That said, there are some unique challenges with charter schools in terms of the way that budgets are funded. Also in terms of the way that capacity works, right? Most charter schools don't have their own lobbyist. They don't have their own person that can help interpret regulations. So when these grants are being applied for, you kind of have all hands on deck trying to figure out how to do that. And granted, you want accountability, but it's tough because it also takes away from their capacity. And like I said, we have one school, Imagine Schools at Mountain View, that is experimenting with transportation this year, and it's really burning a huge hole in their budget. What I've seen happen across the country in some really successful charter district partnerships is they found a way to work together where maybe there's an innovative program that a charter school offers that some local public school members can attend, and vice versa. Charter school members, students can go to sports schools, could play sports for their local zone school. And there's been some challenges, especially in our rural areas around that, where students that make the team don't make the team because they're not coming from that space. So there are a lot of unique challenges when it comes to charter schools. And, charters are a place where you can do some more innovation. You can have a little bit more leeway, and they're technically supposed to be held more accountable for their results. But until we see a little bit more equity around our funding streams, for instance, facilities really do burn a hole in charter schools' budget, whereas where we end up using a lot of our per pupil expenditure to pay for our building, where in the school district you get access to the construction bond that charter schools don't currently get. Hopefully that could be something that is changed so that they'll have the access to be able to deliver more of their funds towards actual student achievement. And there's still certain aspects of categorical funding that charter schools don't get as well, that continue to make it hard to recruit great teachers at charter schools. If you look at charter schools, most of them have teachers that have 3 years or less experience across the board. Even our top charter schools, because it's really hard to meet the pay raise even of an 8-9-year teacher in CCSD, given the limits in the budget. So making those differences around facilities and categorical funding would make a really big difference in charter school achievement.
Yeah, I'll just add just a couple of comments. Been working in the charter space in Nevada for some time, and I think it's tomorrow or later this week, Nevada will be listed as the top state for our charter school policy. That's a good list that we want to be on. It's the environment that have been created by this legislature and this governor to ensure that the notion of autonomy and accountability is really embodied in the law and the policies of our state. I think have been very productive and fruitful. And so not only is the policy advanced significantly, whether it's in districts or the State Public Charter School Authority, really the active statewide sponsor in the state, upholding those principles of autonomy for accountability. They've done a good job. When you look at the portfolio of the performance of our charter schools from 10 to now, you see a marked increase in those schools that are in the 4 or 5 star range. All the things that Colin had suggested are valid, especially when we look at for whom are those charter schools enrolling and how are they working. I think the state is entering into maybe a next phase or a second step of charter schools, the conversation, and maybe this is a faster pace than other states have had this conversation. I don't know enough nationally, I haven't lived it nationally in other areas to know this to be true, but it feels like we've accelerated the sort of performance and the policy, and now have created a situation where the state can begin to can be fairly strategic about how it may utilize charter schools, in addition to opening schools that through the traditional methods, but also use charters in spaces where communities have not had access to the highest performing schools, and get really thoughtful about providing communities, especially communities in poverty, options from national best-in-class or homegrown best-in-class operators. I think that's one of the concepts that's in the Achievement School District that is part of that reform package when we were talking about accountability. We have any one challenges, pick them. I think you could pick them for any community, any school, whether they're charter or whether they're non-charter public or whether they're private. But at the end of the day, it's about excellent schools serving our children. And so how we get there, I think we're collectively agnostic to whether or not it's charter or non-charter, traditional public or private, but at the end of the day that the students are served.
Yeah, so as a business organization, I attend a lot of conferences nationally with other business organizations, and charter and choice are always at the very top of the list of things to talk about and advocate for other business groups. And I'm usually the odd man out at those conferences because as a business organization, I'm the one guy that will often say, I don't know if charter is necessarily the thing that we all make it out to be. But I want to caveat that just a little bit. In Nevada, for example, we have an organization run by a very capable person that most of us know, and they are intending to open a few charter schools in the next 10 years with the goal of getting to potentially 25,000 seats for low-income children at charter schools. What I say to my friends in the business community and other organizations like mine is, in our case, if they were to achieve their wildest dreams and get all 25,000 seats and have them be high-quality seats and have great teachers in every one of those schools and do everything they wanted to do, we would still have 300,000 kids in the Clark County public school system that are not able to go to those schools. And so no matter what charter does, and I'm with all of you on that, I hope there's more of them and more better of them. But no matter what they do and how fast they grow and how many more opportunities they provide, we will still have the core issue that we have to deal with, which is in our public schools, getting those schools that are serving our neediest children up to the level that we would want for all of our schools. So we concentrate our work on the public school system, and I understand charters are public schools, but on the public school system, because we know that all the good people doing a lot of good charter work, even if they're wildly successful, we will still have the majority of kids to work for. So I think it's important to understand that the challenges that charter, I think, or they're starting to figure out nationally, is that it's really a scale issue. You can do some really good things in charter when you're 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 schools. But when you have to start dealing with scale issues like all of our public systems do, you start to end up realizing that you face those very same challenges too, and they're hard to overcome. And that's really one of the reasons that we don't have a more robust charter system here. The facilities challenge is enormous. And they won't come here unless they can be guaranteed $9,500 per student per year. And basically what that's saying is, you guys don't spend enough on your schools. So, and I think people in this room all know that. And so what if that $9,500 was just put into our public schools and we didn't have to worry about charter? And I'm agnostic one way or the other. I don't really care if it's charter or public, but I think it points to the bigger problem, which is a funding problem.
I have to chime in, and I know that those of you that know me out there are going to go, here she goes. Because I know you agree with me on this, but I just want us to be very cautious about when we make kind of statements like that, because we have 325,000 or 320,000 students. Not all of the 300,000 that are left that wouldn't go to charter are bad. Where's Jack over there? Jack. So, I say the same thing. Both of my children went through K-12. Clark County School District. I'm very proud of it. There are incredible things that are happening in some of our schools. So I just want us to be very, very cautious about the fact that we have got amazing things happening. And I'm not taking away from charters. Listen, I'm a charter supporter as well, but I just want us to, again, go as a community for the whole system, and so the state of Nevada. So we've got great things that are going on here. Let's address the issues that we have and see what we can do to work together to make them better. But I caution us to criticize a whole system when there's incredible things that are going on. Both of my kids are in private universities on academic scholarships. I know almost the majority of you can say the same thing out there. So I just really want us to be cautious about that as we look to fix what we need to in our system to help those children who need it most.
And I think that, and I know that Superintendent Skorkowski talks about that. That's a very good point. When we talk about school choice, there are already so many things that certainly CCSD, other districts throughout the state are doing. So it really is all of those options and not just focusing the conversation about school choice and what that means on a certain type of school, whether that's charter, private, or what have you. So I think that's a very good point. I wanted to, we've got just a few minutes left, probably enough time for maybe 2 more questions. If I could just go down the line, starting with you, Brent, on what we talked about earlier. We've talked about challenges that we have with implementation, but looking back to the last legislative session, and certainly not assessing blame here, but what did we not address whether through these reforms or whether, as Terri has talked about with the, let me call them the problems that are social in nature that we need to address. What have we not addressed that looking in the next 2 to 4 years, we need to?
Well, from my perspective, and everybody in the room probably has a pet issue that they feel like should have been addressed, but from my perspective, I don't know that we'd missed anything policy-wise. I mean, we addressed early childhood in some ways. Could we do more? I'm sure we could. We addressed early childhood literacy, separate and apart from just early childhood. Is that going to get it all fixed? I doubt it, but we've started there. The next thing is human capital. Did we address some of that though? Yeah, we had the Great Teacher and Leader Fund, so there's an opportunity for us to provide better professional development, to help support teachers. We introduced a new system called PAR that was from the teachers union in collaboration with the district to help make teachers better. So we did, I think every issue or every area was addressed. We just now need to evaluate every year so that we know what we missed. Because I don't think we know what we missed until we go and implement and see it happen in the classroom and then evaluate. And as Steve mentioned earlier, they actually did put an evaluation piece in this time, which as a fan of good government, I think that was probably the most important piece of what we did. And because a lot of times I do believe that we believe we get a policy right, we put it out, they try to implement, and then nobody really pays attention over the long run. We just go back to the session the next time and create another policy. Having the accountability piece, I think, was probably the biggest thing. But to answer your question, I don't know that we know yet what we missed. But what I do know that we still need to do and look at is we need more teachers and we need more leaders in the buildings. And that wasn't a miss; it's just a fact. And but that's all implementation work. It's not really policy work.
So I think for me, I agree. I don't know that we really missed anything, and I like to see where we go with what we have right now. I think the challenge for all of us is to be able to say, what is it that I do in my personal or work life, and then how can I be a part of that solution? And so that's a challenge I put out to each and every one of you as you leave here today. How do I get involved? And if it's with Brent's group, or if it's with United Way, or if it's with LVGEA, what is it that we can do to help make that change? Because I really, again, Dr. Metcalf, I applaud you. I was reading your letter about why we're here today, and so that's a big statement about what the university can do. So I would like to put that challenge back on you all to be the convener, the researcher. You're the data collection. If you all will take that charge and hold us all accountable to help you make sure that it's successful, I think that we may be able to make some good strides.
I think if there's one thing that's starting to come out, and I think it's really been front and center, is like our teachers are really, really busting their butts out there. And it's been a tough environment, not just to recruit, but also to retain. We know we constantly have a lot of people leaving the profession. And when I bring up the phrase, like about being patient, a big piece of that is thinking about those elementary schools where over half of their positions are currently being filled by long-term subs, and those spots within Clark County where we actually have instructional coaches going back into the classroom because they need to be in the classroom, but they'll be starting in late December, early January to do that. So the one piece that I think hasn't really been addressed from a policy standpoint, because it's one thing to have like great teachers and leaders and some of these other funding packets out there, but what are we doing in terms of like a long-term view of where we're going to be getting our educators from as a pipeline source? And I had a chance to hear Kaya Henderson, who's the DC superintendent, speak this past week, and she's oversaw one of the highest growing in terms of performance urban regions in the country. And she brought up a very interesting point about education. It used to be a point, 40, 50 years ago, where if you looked at teaching as a profession, if you were a person of color, or if you were a woman, that was one of the only jobs you could do. So you actually had no issues around teacher quality and no actual thinking around that, because we had a lot of the best and the brightest folks in the classroom, because that was the only thing they were able to do. As options diversified and people had other choices, that became less and less the case. But we didn't really have a system that was kind of built in this idea of we develop our leadership. We actually build people to have the capacity to be highly effective teachers. It really wasn't part of the conversation until relatively recently. But now that it is, we need to actually start thinking about what that means as a profession. Because right now, you know, it's and this isn't a controversial statement. It's a matter of fact that's been looked at. Our education programs are not attracting the most talented folks out of high school, and they're not the most competitive programs at any university, right? So what are we going to start to do as a policy standpoint to make this a place where people actually want to be? To make it so that high schoolers will like, you know what, I want to be a teacher. Maybe there needs to be some incentives that start to happen around tuition to get folks into this space because we know we need them. But there has to be some sort of long-term policy solution about that pipeline, or else we're never going to be able to meet these goals that we're going for.
Yeah, when you start thinking that the governor got through 25 of the 26 reforms that he wanted to get in place, it's hard to imagine there could have been much more to do. One area that I am a little concerned about as we talk about the reorganization of the Clark County School District. I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but when I think about those of us that have been very actively involved in trying to help manage this huge organization, there's so many issues that need to get fixed first before we start thinking about whether it's good policy to break it into smaller districts or not. I think in some ways we got the cart before the horse here. So I'd like to see us focus on the things that we can do to better manage, better deliver our education system. But as far as other things, it's hard to imagine that we could have done much more. We were very pleased. Terri and I co-chaired a group called the Las Vegas Education Council, and we got really for the first time, I think, a group of business leaders and education leaders in the room, and we actually started communicating. You know, historically, the dialogue between business people and educators went something like this. Educators would look to the business people and say, you know, you need to invest more in education. And then the business people would look back at them and, why would we invest in a broken system? And they kept talking past each other for years and years and years. We actually sat down, we had some great communication. We came up with a program, which I thought was pretty aggressive and quite robust. But we probably had 5 or 6 things that we wanted to do, and this governor took that to a whole new level. So from our perspective, we were very pleased with it.
I'll be brief because you just asked the man whose responsibility it is to implement 25 of 26 programs what we missed.
I don't want to get you in trouble, so I understand completely.
Apparently we missed one. How's that sound?
That works. That works. Well, I think we've gone just a little bit over our time, but thank you. 5 wonderful perspectives up here. Again, a privilege to listen to all of you. I think everybody benefited from it. So thank you for being a part.